not all change is drift. So it takes discernment, it takes structures to know the difference. So why not? We don't want to handcuff people, but we do want to give them the rails to run on, to stay on mission, to advance that mission for decades to come.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Framework Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Ken Engel, president of Southeastern University. And, of course, joining me as always, our co-host, Michael Steiner, SCU Senior Vice President for Advancement and Innovation. Excited today to introduce our guest for the show, Becca Spradlin, right?
Spradlin,
yeah, I want to make sure I get it correct. But Becca is the founder of On Mission Advisors and author of Lead On Mission, Advance Faith at Work, Avoid Mission Drift, and Build a Legacy of Eternal Impact. And what I love about what you do, you help Christian leaders, you help organizations define, really protect and champion what, is important for all of our faith-based organizations, not just in times of vision casting, but through seasons of growth, transition, and challenge. You work with organizations across, 5 continents?
Yes.
Literally. I mean, you've got a vast domain there, and you bring a deep understanding of how to lead organizations, how to lead with clarity and conviction in today's fast-paced world. So we want to have a great conversation. So welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're so delighted that you could take the time. I want to start out. You've led some in some incredibly diverse spaces, from international microfinancing to consulting, CEOs, boards. I mean, you've had great experience. But across all of that, what has remained unchanged at your calling? And was there a moment maybe in your early journey when you sensed God clarifying that calling to come alongside leaders?
Yes. Great question. I think even going back to my college days, I feel like the Lord used internships, mission trips to really guide me. I was studying business. I wanted to go into business and make a bunch of money and give it away. That was kind of my thought going into school. But God used those experiences to point me toward international economic development and then microfinance specifically. And I had the opportunity to work in a microfinance rating agency, which is a very niche sort of field to get into. We were doing research on investment flows into microfinance and organizational assessments. And during that time, God introduced me to Hope International, which does microfinance. It's a nonprofit that works globally. But they pair it with the good news of Jesus Christ. Wow. And so hope for today, hope for eternity. It was really powerful. I ended up working for them right around the time I joined. The CEO, Peter Greer, and Chris Horst wrote a book called Mission Drift.
Yeah, yes.
It's a great book.
Yes, excellent book. Yep. And Mission Drift is something we actually talked about a lot in the microfinance sector. Have we drifted to being more profit motivated? And so that term wasn't unfamiliar, but the way Peter and Chris kind of handled it focused on the faith-driven organizations. How do we make sure our faith does not fade over time? And their focus was nonprofits. And so the book came out. One of the things they had me do as an early project at Hope was to create an internal assessment for us to use, not if, but where we're drifting.
Sure.
So that happened because of the background that the Lord gave me at the rating agency. So I created this internal assessment, started piloting it overseas in 2014. And from there, when the book got traction, more people read it, they would actually come to us at Hope and say, can you do an assessment for us? Could you come do a workshop for us, for our boards? Businesses, nonprofits were coming to us. And that actually led to the formation of On Mission Advisors to really help more intentionally serve these leaders that didn't want to drift. They wanted to keep their mission clear.
Yeah, no, that's great.
And what are some of the things that you've seen as you're working with these leaders that caused that drift? I mean, just kind of walk us through, now that you've had this wealth of experience, where does it start?
Yes, I think there's 3 big areas of pressure that you face, whether you're a nonprofit or a business. It's going to be your funding. Often you think about compromising for funding.
Sure.
Well,
to get that donor in a nonprofit case, or maybe that partner that's, are they completely aligned? I don't know, but we could really use their funding or expertise. I think a lot with nonprofits and social enterprises, the next one I would say operationally or programmatically, sometimes taking on too much of a good thing can distract you from your core, that higher purpose that the Lord has given you. So I think you got to be careful about scope creep in terms of your programs and your operations as well. And then the last one I would say is your people, because at the end of the day, if you compromise on your people, that's where the decisions to compromise on programs and funding come in. So if you hire someone, say you really need that professor the next semester, that's a required class, and you need that skill set, you need that capability, are you going to compromise on the character piece? Yeah. So often that happens with just slight compromises, and then over time, an organization, a department, a team can start to go off mission.
Yeah. No, I love your emphasis on guarding against mission drift. And in your book, you describe it not as a loud rebellion, but what tends to happen is it's this quiet drift. And sometimes you don't even realize you're drifting. Wait a second, we're off course. We're not really doing what our mission tells us to do. What's the moment like, and how did it hit you?
Yeah, so I have to say, when you're talking about mission drift, I feel like there is a leadership prerequisite here, and it's humility.
Sure.
Because without humility, so often, I think really well-intended leaders are saying, well, that would never happen in our organization. I live in this space. I study this all the time. I'm like, it does happen with really intentional leaders with clear conviction. In a business setting, a single transition of owner or leadership, you can lose literally decades of building up a culture and values. You can lose it in months.
Yeah.
It's scary how quickly it can go with one, major transition. But there's also those 1 degree kind of almost imperceptible shifts that happen over time. And they can lead you off course as well, maybe at a slower pace. But I do think this is where boards and trusted advisors help.
Right.
Yeah. And to walk us through some of those structures that you're seeing that really help guard against mission drift, like what? Because as we talk about, there's a lot of things we talk about here. A big phrase we have is that structure demands behavior. So the structures you have kind of lead it. And oftentimes, as you said, leaders don't even know that they've made a decision to mission drift because of the structures that's causing them to make certain behaviors. So what are the structures you've seen that really help guard against that mission drift?
Right. So there's 4 strategies that we recommend. First, define. You've got to have a really clear foundation on what that higher purpose is. What is that unchanging core that you want to be true of your organization? Without that you don't have a solid foundation. And when we work with organization, I encourage them to even define what drift is.
Okay.
So I've never actually walked into a client. They know what drift is in their heads.
Right.
But they've never written it out and talked about it as a team. And and when we do, there's usually differences of opinion on this. So really getting it out there on paper. I think the other piece is defining what drift isn't. And what I mean by that is I love to give my public service announcement, which is not all change is drift.
Wow.
We need to change to remain relevant. We need to change to stay in business. We need to adapt to our ever-changing culture. So not all change is drift. So it takes discernment, it takes structures to know the difference. So why not? We don't want to handcuff people, but we do want to give them the rails to run on, to stay on mission, to advance that mission for decades to come. So we've got a clear definition, protect it, making sure that higher purpose is really well integrated into the DNA, your articles of incorporation, your bylaws, your handbooks, your operations, those kind of guides for the organization. And then the third one is champion. This one's all about the culture and the people that you're building, because they're the ones that are really going to advance it beyond your tenure, beyond us. So how are we doing hiring really well? Hiring for those values, especially in key leadership positions, board positions, because those folks are really stewarding it. So succession is really important. Thinking succession. And I always like to emphasize succession because most small, medium-sized businesses and nonprofits are not adequately planned for succession.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Research bears this out. My own experience bears this out. And it is inevitable for every single organization.
Yeah.
So if one transition takes you off course and you're not succession planning, I feel like we're not in a great position. across the board in terms of leadership, especially in the faith-driven space, to be ready for that transition to propel the mission forward.
Yeah, so true. I mean, I think about our own university here. Before I came, they went 2 years between me and the last president.
Wow.
And that was because they didn't plan for succession or even know how to tackle succession in a way that would continue the growth, because under the previous president, this university was growing. He took it from bankruptcy to a robust university, healthy, strong, and sustainable. He leaves, and now what do they do? You know, and it literally took them 2 years before I came, and of course, we all know what happens to organizations when you have that kind of a drift, if you will, you know, a lack of leadership, and so we had a major overhaul of turning this university around when we started to take the leadership and the helm. But it reminds me of Hebrews chapter 2, verse 1, which is clear instruction. We have to pay careful attention to what we've heard, so that we don't drift away from our calling, our core identity. What does that kind of careful attention look like on a day-by-day basis of the discipline in a leader's life when it comes to mission?
That's a great question. So I mentioned before we have 4 strategies we really emphasize: define, protect, champion. And for years, those were the 3 we really emphasized. And we are missing a big one, and that's abiding.
Wow.
The leaders need to be, we need to be connected to the vine, or else we don't know how to define, how to protect, how to champion. And that is exactly to your point. It's a daily working out of our faith and daily staying connected to the Lord, because this path is one where we need to be constantly building, day-to-day, building clarity, making sure the mission is clear, emphasizing it, building the culture around it. And then it takes courage because it's going to get hard. And by coming up with those kind of guidance and guardrails in advance, when we work with clients, it's we want to have the conversation before we are pressed up against a wall, because you don't want to be making those decisions when you feel that pressure and you feel that the heat is on and the media is on you and the attention is on you. You want to make the decision ahead of time so that you are prepared, to take a stand, to live out your faith, to do what God's calling you to do. But that abiding is so, so critical. And that is an everyday, moment by moment, even posture, and that prayerful posture is key.
Yeah. And so let's say you've got a leader who's abiding, they're in there, and they're listening to this podcast right now, and they're like, oh, maybe I've got mission drift. What are some of the signs? What are some of the early warning signs maybe they've ignored? What are some of the things you'd tell that leader, okay, this is what you're looking for, and this is how you know that drift is happening?
Right. I think sometimes it's really subtle, and especially in the people side of things. So if, for example, say you're an organization, nonprofit that has a statement of faith, and you require everyone to sign that statement of faith. If people are like, okay, I'm willing to do that, I can live with that. That kind of, I call them passive acceptors. That's a yellow flag moving to red flag. So if you are just passively kind of accepting of the higher purpose, and your team is shifting to be more of these passive acceptors, or your board, even just bringing one on, you'll start to see that dilution. So you really want active champions, people who are going to be for that higher purpose, even when it gets hard. So how do we discern and be sensitive to, is our team shifting to be more passive, or are they really going to be active acceptors who will champion this mission even when it's hard? And your board too, that absolutely matters on your board.
You've talked about the impact of hiring and the people you bring on your team to really make or break. I mean, they make or break your mission in many ways. To me, that speaks to culture. Culture plays a huge role in fulfilling your mission. Sometimes what's written, I think, in the handbook and what's happening in the hallway are 2 different stories.
Yes.
And how do you kind of assess and shape the culture so that it always reinforces, not erodes the mission that you're on?
I think there was a Herman Miller quote where he talks about, it's like you communicate the mission and values, and you communicate it until you want to throw up.
Yes.
And then you say it one more time.
Right.
And so I think there's part of it. It is this is an uphill, kind of narrower path to pursue a higher purpose in a thriving, healthy organization. And so constant communication is key. The leaders need to be living this out. Absolutely. If you're not modeling it from the top, what you say and do should be reflective of the words on the wall. If the words on the wall are not the same as the leader behavior, that's a big red flag. And that culture will deteriorate because then it seems hypocritical.
Sure.
So I think making sure that the behavior and the values are lived out. And I would say going back to the humility piece, like we're not going to do this perfectly, right?
Yeah.
So when you make a mistake or when you catch something that feels like mission drift, in that moment, how do you respond as a leader? Do you try to brush it under the rug?
Yep.
Do you address it in a way that's not shaming anyone, but saying, "Here's what we learned from this.
Right.
We don't want to do this again. We learned, and now we build a different structure. We do things differently, especially as you're growing as an organization, because growth is a good thing. But you can outpace your structures if you're not scaling them to, again, advance and stay focused on that higher purpose."
Yeah, well said. Let's talk a little bit about legacy, not just the kind, people write about, but the kind that matters in eternity. That kind of legacy. Your book closes, I think, with this powerful challenge to lead in a way that builds eternal impact. What does that practically look like in day-to-day leadership decisions?
Right. I think so often, like in the marketplace and in our communities today, fewer and fewer people are going to church. So they're not able to experience the love of Christ at church or a hope or for eternity there. But they're going to work. Even people who grew up in Christian homes, the research shows they're leaving the church. And so how can we make our workplaces a place where people experience the love in Christ?
Wow.
And so you see practices of this that are really creative. And that's where that discernment and abiding with the Lord comes in. I've talked to, companies that have a prayer button on their websites, like, can we pray for you? The owner and founder and his wife will pray for you. That might be for you. Maybe that's not for you. Maybe it's an employee caring program and meeting employees where they are and opt-in Bible studies at lunch and things like that. So there's there's dozens, hundreds of ways that organizations are trying to live out their faith in the workplace. But I think when you start to care for the whole person and that faith dimension of each person that enters into your building, that's where you start to see God at work.
Yeah.
So I believe God's already at work in your company, especially if you're following him. He's already there. And maybe you're seeing the eternal fruit in those testimonies. Yeah. Maybe you're not seeing it yet, but I would just encourage you to keep leaning into him because he will guide you in what makes sense for your business and how to live out your faith. I mean, something I love to encourage leaders to do is, even though maybe most of your workforce may not reflect your beliefs or believe what you believe, people will typically honor your story and your testimony of what God has done in your life. So I love when leaders use their platform to just share their story.
Right.
And this is what God has done for me. This is how I've seen God provide in our company. And those God stories, along with a personal testimony of a humble leader who admits when they're wrong, can be really, really powerful in creating a place where people experience the love of Christ, even if they don't yet know Christ.
I love it.
Oh, that's great.
And, a lot of this, to kind of pivot, what are some of the, we've talked a lot about what drift looks like and how it happens. What does faithfulness look like? What does that side look like? What are some of the attributes of leaders who are faithful, and what does a faithful organization look like from your experience?
Great question. Yeah, I say it requires an uncommon intentionality because most, leaders of thriving organizations, it takes intentionality to get there, but this harder, narrower path. This is uncommon intentionality. And we have dozens of practices that we recommend. We actually have a free self-assessment on our website to highlight some of those practices that are in the book that we've learned from other faith-forward leaders. But it's a self-discipline, it's a self-awareness, and it's that humility, knowing that drift could happen even under my own leadership and certainly could happen in the future. So it's that combined with a real servant leadership, I think that's a common thread I see across these organizations. This servant leadership where they're showing love to their team, and that cascades down and affects the whole culture.
Love it.
Yeah, very good. One final question, maybe for a leader who's listening right now, and maybe they're weary.
Yes.
They're tired. Maybe they're staying faithful, but they're just not seeing the results. And what would you say to encourage them to just hang in there, to keep on going, stay steady?
Yeah, the best word I have on that is 1 Corinthians 15:58. So it's stand firm, let nothing move you. Always give yourself fully to the work of the Lord, because you know in the Lord your labor is not in vain. Yeah. And I think that encouragement is so critical, because so often you don't see the eternal fruit yet. Yeah. And you may not realize it, but the ripple effect, just simply because of the platform the Lord's given you and the impact of your reach, just staying faithful to things and discerning with the Lord what those things should be. We may not see the ROI on them, this month, this week, this lifetime even, but trusting that God is at work and really leaning into the faith. And I think community is key. We're not meant to do this alone.
Right.
And the Holy Spirit is with us,
That's
absolutely. Right. But it's a harder path. This is not easy to do. And so just recognizing this isn't easy. I can't do it on my own. God is with me, the Holy Spirit's with me, and surrounding with community to encourage and pray for you, because the target on your back is there.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some tools, real quick, for someone listening, maybe want somebody to come in and help them assess possible mission? What kinds of things do you provide?
Sure. So if you go to onmissionadvisors.com, you can see what we do. We do everything from strategic planning to governance and guidance and guardrails with your board, to make governance support, to really help clarify what's in scope, what's drift for us, and how do we build alignment? Because we need alignment. And maybe you're in a place where you're like, actually, I feel like we have really strong alignment. And I would encourage you, that's the moment to start getting those guidance and guardrails in place to make sure that that alignment continues beyond you, that you're continuing to develop leaders and hire toward that. So those are the types of things we help with.
That's great. Well, Becca, great to have you on the show today. Love this conversation. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your story, and your heart for helping leaders stay anchored, organizations stay anchored in the mission that God has for them.
Yeah, and I love it. And if you want to stay connected with Becca, you can check her out on LinkedIn at Becca Spradlin. Grab a copy of her book, Lead on Mission, wherever you get your books, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you get it. Audiobook as well.
Audiobook, of course.
Love it. That's the way I like to listen to them. So make sure you grab that out there. Incredible resource as you lead your organization. And thank you so much for listening to Framework Leadership. We'll see you next time.
Take care, everybody.
Well, thanks for joining us on Framework Leadership. If you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe so leadership insights keep coming your way. You can also catch every episode on your favorite podcast platforms and look for bonus resources. Subscribe to the Framework Leadership newsletter at kentingle.com. Make sure you're following us on Instagram at Kent_Ingle and at Dr. Michael Steiner, on X at Kent_Ingle, and at Facebook at Kent Ingle to stay up to date with the podcast and everything happening at Southeastern University.
Thanks for being part of the community.